At first, the 1981 murder of Alan Bono appeared to be an open and shut case in Brookfield, Connecticut. To the police, it was clear that the 40-year-old landlord had been killed by his tenant, Arn Cheyenne Johnson, during a violent argument. But after his arrest, Johnson made an incredible claim. The devil made him do it. Aided by two paranormal investigators, the 19-year-old's attorney presented their client's claim of demonic possession as a potential defense for his murder of Bono. The courts have dealt with the existence of God, said Johnson's attorney, Martin Minella. Now they're going to have to deal with the existence of the devil. It was the first time in history that a defense like this one was used in an American courtroom. Nearly 40 years later, Johnson's case is still shrouded in controversy and unsettling speculation. It is also the inspiration for the film The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. On February 16, 1981, Arn Johnson stabbed his landlord Alan Bono to death with a 5-inch pocket knife, committing the first murder ever recorded in the 193-year history of Brookfield. Before the murder, Johnson was, by all accounts, a regular teenager with no criminal record. But the strange occurrences that ended in the murder allegedly began months earlier. In Johnson's courtroom defense, he claimed that the source of all this suffering started with the 11-year-old brother of his fiancée, Debbie Glatzel. In the summer of 1980, Debbie's brother David claimed that he'd repeatedly encountered an old man who would taunt him. At first, Johnson and Glatzel thought David was just trying to get out of doing chores, and dismissed the story entirely. Nonetheless, the encounters continued, growing both more frequent and more violent. David would wake up crying hysterically, describing visions of a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features and jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. Before long, the family asked a priest from a church nearby to bless their home, to no avail. So they hoped that paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren could lend a hand. He would kick, bite, spit, swear, terrible words, David's family members said of his possession. He experienced strangling attempts by invisible hands, which he tried to pull from his neck, and powerful forces would flop him repeatedly, head to toe like a rag doll. Johnson stayed with the family to help however he could, but disturbingly, the child's nightly terrors began to seep into the daytime as well. David described seeing an old man with a white beard dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans. And as the child's visions continued, suspicious noises began emanating from the attic. Meanwhile, David started hissing, having seizures, and speaking in strange voices while quoting John Milton's Paradise Lost in the Bible. Reviewing the case, the Warrens concluded that this was clearly a case of demonic possession. However, psychiatrists who investigated the case after the fact claimed that David merely had a learning disability. The Warrens claimed that over the course of 3 subsequent exorcisms, oversaw by priests, David levitated, cursed, and even stopped breathing. Perhaps even more astonishingly, David allegedly predicted the murder that Arn Cheyenne Johnson would eventually commit. By October 1980, Johnson started taunting the demonic presence, telling it to stop bothering his fiance's brother. "Take me on, leave my little buddy alone," he cried. As a source of income, Johnson worked for a tree surgeon. Meanwhile, Bono managed a kennel. The two were purportedly friendly and often met up near the kennel, with Johnson sometimes even calling in sick to work in order to do so. But on February 16, 1981, a vicious argument broke out between them. At around 6:30 p.m., Johnson suddenly drew out a pocket knife and aimed it at Bono. Bono was stabbed multiple times in the chest and stomach, and then was left to bleed to death. Police arrested Johnson an hour later, and they said that the two men had simply been fighting over Johnson's fiancée, Debbie. But the Warrens insisted that there was more to the story. At some point prior to the murder, Johnson had allegedly investigated a well in the same area where his fiancée's brother claimed to experience his first encounter with the malicious presence wreaking havoc on their lives. The Warrens warned Johnson not to go near the same well, but he did anyway, perhaps to see if the demons truly took over his body after he had taunted them. Johnson later claimed that he saw a demon hiding within the well who possessed him until after the murder. Though authorities investigated the Warrens' claims of a haunting, they stuck with the story that Bono was simply killed during an altercation with Johnson over his fiancée. Johnson's attorney, Martin Minella, tried his best to enter a plea of not guilty by reason of demonic possession. He even planned to subpoena the priests who allegedly attended the exorcism, urging them to break tradition by speaking about their controversial rites. Over the course of the trial, Minella and the Warrens were routinely mocked by their peers, who saw them as profiteers of tragedy. "They have an excellent vaudeville act, a good road show," said mentalist George Kresge. "It's just this case more involves clinical psychologists than it does them." Judge Robert Callahan ultimately rejected Minella's plea. Judge Callahan argued such a defense would be impossible to prove, and that any testimony on the matter was unscientific and thus irrelevant. The collaboration of 4 priests during the 3 exorcisms was never confirmed, but the Diocese of Bridgeport acknowledged that priests worked on helping David Glatzel during a difficult time. The priests in question, meanwhile, were ordered not to speak on the matter publicly. "No one from the church has said one way or the other what was involved," said Reverend Nicholas V. Greco, diocese spokesman, "and we decline to say." But Johnson's lawyers were permitted to examine Bono's clothing. The lack of any blood, rips, or tears, they argued, could help support the claim of demonic involvement. However, no one in the court was convinced, so Johnson's legal team opted for a self-defense plea. Ultimately, Johnson was convicted of first-degree manslaughter on November 24, 1981, and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He only served about 5. Thank you for making your way through the video. If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. And until next time.